Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Yesterday, we walked the sterile high-tech streets of Singapore to witness how extortion syndicates use ancient cultural fears to strip millions in real estate from highly educated executives. Today, we're boarding a flight across the world to land on the rugged mountainous island of Haiti. We're looking at the ultimate historical intersection of organic chemistry, cultural programming, and absolute psychological enslavement. We are diving into a case that dismantles one of the modern pop culture's most distorted myths to reveal a terrifying real system of social control. Today, we break down the clinical reality of Voodoo zombification studies, famously investigated by ethnobotanist Wade Davis. Now, let's have an immediate reality check about how the Western world views the concept of a zombie. Thanks to decades of Hollywood horror movies, video games, and pop culture, our minds immediately picture the rotting, flesh-eating, mindless ghouls of the Walking Dead. We look at the concept of zombification as pure cosmic book fiction, a campfire story meant to scare children or sell movie tickets. But let's look at the past cinematic special effects and be completely real as strategic operators. In the rural interior of Haiti, zombification wasn't a movie trope. It was a highly sophisticated, terrifying effect form of capital punishment and social control executed by clandestine criminal networks known as the Bazango societies. They didn't create flesh-eating monsters. They created living, breathing, profoundly traumatized agricultural laborers whose critical faculties, memories, and individual identities had been systemically erased. They didn't use supernatural magic spells. They used an intricate two-pronged attack of lethal marine neurotoxins paired with total psychological trance suggestion. Today, we decode the raw clinical mechanics of how to completely break a human will. To understand how a real-world zombie is manufactured, you have to look at the legendary case of Clavius Narcisse. In 1962, Narcisse walked into an American-directed hospital in Haiti, spitting up blood, suffering from severe respiratory distress, and experiencing muscle paralysis. Within 2 hours, 2 Western-trained physicians officially pronounced him dead. His sister signed the death certificate and he was buried in a heavy wooden coffin under the stifling Haiti dirt. Yet, nearly 2 decades later in 1980, Clavius Narcisse walked into a rural village market, approached his sister, and identified himself by using a childhood nickname only she would know. He hadn't risen from the grave via supernatural dark magic. He had been the victim of a calculated multi-stage biochemical and psychological hijack. The process begins with the biochemical shutdown. The Bazango sorcerers, acting as an underground judicial system enforcing community laws, manufacture a high, complex secret powder. The primary active ingredient is tetrodotoxin, an incredibly potent neurotoxin harvested from local pufferfish. When applied to a target's skin through an open scratch or slipped into their food, tetrodotoxin blocks the sodium channels in the nervous system. It drops the human body into a state of profound metabolic depression that mimics absolute clinical death. The heart rate slows to an almost imperceptible flutter, breathing drops to a microscopic level, and the skin turns icy cold. The victim remains fully conscious, trapped inside a totally paralyzed shell. Listening to their own family weep, hearing the dirt hit their coffin lid, and experiencing the absolute psychological horror of being buried alive. Once the burial is complete, the second, purely psychological phase of the trap is executed. Stage 1. The biochemical shutdown. Apply precise doses of tetrodotoxin to mimic clinical death, forcing the fully conscious victim to experience their own funeral and burial inside a paralyzed shell. Stage 2. The shocking awakening and chemical overdrive. Unearth the victim in a state of hypoxia, instantly dosing them with Daturia stramonium, zombie cucumber, to obliterate memory and shatter reality testing. Stage 3, the cultural trance implantation. Exploit the shattered, highly suggestible mind by delivering absolute verbal directives that they are a dead soul, cementing total compliance as a labourer. A few days later, the gravediggers exhume the coffin. The victim is dragged out, starved of oxygen and profoundly traumatized. The operators immediately dose them with the second chemical, the concoction derived from Datura stramonium, known locally as zombie cucumber. Datura is a powerful hallucinogen and deliriant that induces a state of absolute amnesia, intense disorientation and severe compliance. It completely destroys the brain's ability to run logical data processing. Let's look at the absolute sarcastic absurdity of how a Western observer might analyse this sequence compared to the raw cultural reality. A Westerner looks at a guy who has been poisoned, buried alive, dug up and pumped full of heavy hallucinogenic drugs and thinks, yep, that poor man has acute brain damage and severe chemical delirium. But inside that cultural schema of rural Haiti, the victim has a completely different software program running. Since birth, they've been taught that the Bazango societies have the literal power to steal a man's soul and leave behind a walking corpse. When the victim wakes up in a state of chemical disorientation, looking at the sorcerers, the operator doesn't need to lock them in chains. They simply use authoritative, rhythmic hypnotic suggestions. You are dead, your soul is gone, you belong to the field now. The victim's shattered mind completely accepts the suggestion because it's the only script available to explain their terrifying physical reality. They spend the rest of their lives working on isolated plantations, completely compliant, never trying to escape, because they genuinely believe they have no soul left to run away with. As strategic hypnotists and modern executive performance coaches, we must look past the theatrical folklore of voodoo to analyse the precise biological and linguistic levers weaponized in this process. The zombification studies prove that if you combine physical trauma, chemical disorientation, and absolute cultural suggestibility, you can overwrite a human's being core survival drive. The psychological erasure of trauma, being buried alive, creates a state of profound catastrophic shock that completely shatters the default mode network. When the subconscious is subjected to an existential trauma of that magnitude, its core defense mechanism is to disassociate entirely from the past identity. The old clavius is abandoned by the brain to survive the immediate horror. The hypnotic vacuum of deliriance. The use of datura functions as a chemical wrecking ball to the critical gatekeeper. By blocking acetylcholine in the brain, it strips away the mind's capacity to compare past memories with present reality. The victim is left in a perpetual waking dream state, making them completely defenseless against any direct, authoritative commands delivered by the handler. The reinforcement of the closed loop. The zombie is kept in a state of permanent low-grade toxic compliance through repetitive dosing and complete social isolation. Without any external feedback or alternative narratives to challenge their condition, the suggestion that they are a living dead soul solidifies into an unsaleable biological operating system. The Wade Davis studies ignite a massive global debate within the scientific community, exposing the terrifying depths to which human pharmacology and psychological priming can be fused. It remains the most extreme historical demonstration of how the subconscious mind, when utterly broken by fear and chemical intervention, will choose to execute a script of absolute slavery rather than face the void of its own shattered reality. The profound urgent lesson of zombification studies is a visceral reminder that your personal sovereignty, your internal identity, and your individual are your most sacred assets. While you'll never face a secret society with pufferfish toxins, you must realise that the modern professional world runs its own subtle corporate versions of zombification. There are high-pressure environments, toxic cultures, and predatory leaders that seek to overwhelm your nervous system with chronic stress, isolate you from your core values, and feed you repetitive suggestions of unworthiness until you are mindlessly executed executing their script for your life. True, unshakable power is about preserving your own voice, knowing how to protect your critical thinking, defend your mental boundaries, and remain the absolute author of your own execution. If you've realized that you're navigating high performance pressure by operating like a corporate zombie, numbing your own instincts, mindlessly grinding through an exhausting schedule that completely drains your life energy, and keeping your true ambitions entirely buried because you're terrified of breaking away from the script, you are letting the noise control your destiny. It's time to step out of the trance and reclaim your sovereign will. If you're ready to clear that cognitive fog, stabilize your nervous system, and lead your business with a sharp, independent, and completely unburdened mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we'll dismantle the external conditioning, ground your identity in absolute present reality, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true present sovereign authority. Remember, aligned subconscious plus healed history equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind, visualize your future, grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.